All right, here we are again. We had a bit of a break, back to talk aviation. And it's been a month, Martin, since we've got together and chatted about this subject. I think last time you were still in Australia.
I think the last one was out of Australia, indeed.
But I'm turning to my left. You're sitting on my left, and there you are.
Yep.
It's like you never went anywhere.
Clear as day.
All right, plenty has been happening in the world of aviation. Where do we start, Martin?
And a good place to start is MH370.
Of course. Gosh, we've been sitting around waiting for something to happen, and at last.
It happened.
So what do you make of this? Obviously, if it's a piece of a 777, it can only be one aircraft.
Absolutely, and it's in the right place. If you accept the theory that it went down somewhere off Australia in the Indian Ocean, this is apparently where stuff would wash up. There was talk at the time of saying in a year or so it will probably make its way to the east coast of Africa, and it appears to have done just that. Well, almost the east coast of Africa.
Interesting, the first bit to be found is the flaperon. It's probably one of the most hardy components of the wing. That's the bit that works at high speed, isn't it? The thing you see working all the time out the window at cruise altitude. And I'm sure everybody was looking with a lot of interest at the pictures to try and sort of work out what forces might have been applied to it. You've seen the pictures. What do you make of it?
Looks in pretty good shape.
Which could tell us what, do you think?
Well, that it didn't smash into the sea at a well, I mean, it's all conjecture at this point. At what point would it have been knocked off or flown off? But it does look to be in pretty good shape. There doesn't appear to be any ripples on it. There's no gashes in it. It looks like it just came off the mountings.
It doesn't look like it's been subjected across its entire surface area to excessive forces, really, is probably one way of putting it, isn't it?
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
One thinks back to the Ethiopian Flight 961 crash landing off the Comoros Islands. What's that? In the Indian Ocean, I think.
Yep.
And they were unlucky. They ran out of fuel, and I think half of the aircraft straddled a reef, which meant it cartwheeled.
Yeah.
But you could see in that cartwheeling how a component like that could come off the wing.
Yes, I mean, as I have to stress, we're just guessing, but it doesn't look like it came off in a massively catastrophic, mangling. It just... So if it flew gently into the sea, I mean, gentle is a relative term at this point, it just looks like it came off.
Yeah. Well, if it ran out of fuel, even at altitude, the aircraft will always try and return to the most stable flight regime, as it's designed to do. So it's not going to just plummet, is it? It's going to sort of waft like a leaf.
Like a falling leaf.
Potentially.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you've got a situation where the thing runs out of fuel and starts falling from a great height, it's not going to have the same force as going in at 400 miles an hour, nose down, with full power on, or pulling 10 Gs at 600 miles an hour and ripping the wings off.
Yeah. Unless, of course, that did happen and this thing managed to dislodge itself and flutter down on its own. But we'll wait and see. It's a very good lead. They found some Chinese language drinking bottles, which look to be about the same age. They found a bottle of Indonesian branded cleaning fluid that all washed up on the same side of the island.
Which fit.
They think there was a seat cushion. But interestingly enough, there's now reports coming out that flaperon might have been there for a longer period of time. Some person said, she noticed it in her walks 6 to 8 weeks ago.
Okay, so it's not just washed up yesterday or the last week.
It's not a recent thing. And the seat cushion that someone thinks they might have recovered and then chucked on the tip to burn, that would have also been about 2 months ago. And right at the beginning, they did say that given the prevailing currents, etc., in the southern Indian Ocean, that's pretty much where stuff will end up eventually. This will give them the opportunity to concentrate their search on the area most likely, because right now they've only searched a small fraction of the massive potential area that it could have gone down. I think as we speak they are refining that down to a much smaller area, which will enable them to hopefully pinpoint it. There have been some questions about how accurate the sonar that they're using is, but as they've pointed out, they've found a wreck of boats that they didn't even know had gone down last century, or the century before, 19th century, and the resolution of these sonar pictures is such they could see the rivets in the steel plates on the hull. So, if they get a reasonable area and they go to it again, here's hoping they find it.
Well, Air France 447 was in pretty deep water. Took them 2 years to get the flight recorders out of there. It wasn't an easy operation, so there are precedents. So I don't think this will be solved. I just wonder if we're going to be thinking about what happened here, if we're going to start talking again about oxygen fires in the cockpit and, how does the aircraft decompress, stay flying, and surely Boeing, of all people, and anyone with a 777-200ER, albeit reducing amount of airlines, will want to know that there's not something lurking in there that could cause this still.
Absolutely. I'm sure they're very interested. But actually, more to the point, what is in that hole in Kazakhstan?
Okay. All right, so we await more information on that. Now, this one's really caught my eye, and we've talked about it before on this program. What happens when everyone makes up with Iran and vice versa, knowing, as we do, that they've been operating, 40-year-old 747-100s and SPs for donkey's years and cannibalizing 727s and Tu-154s just to stay in the air because and keeping 707s operating only up to a couple of years ago because, the sanctions. Now, this deal on the nukes has been reached. They need to basically go and replace every civil aircraft they've got pretty well, don't they?
Well, they're going to need a whole bunch, yeah.
It would run into the hundreds.
Probably, yeah.
Possibly.
Eventually.
Who's going to be the beneficiary? Do you think they'll split orders evenly between US and Airbus, or Boeing and Airbus? Or whose stands to gain more, do you think?
Well, they're pulled in two directions here. The Iranians, ironically, love all things American.
Yeah, but they can't admit it. They're still basically saying, yes, we've got this deal, but we still hate them.
Yeah, well, that's what the government's saying.
Yeah.
They can't overlook the fact that Europe's never really been that sanctiony against them. The European companies have always been involved in Iran, and Alcatel and all these people.
Particularly France.
France and Germany have been quite big in Iran. I suspect they'll be politically expedient and they will mix it. They'll mix it up.
Yes, so in their negotiations, the Iranians surely had in mind that they know that they have to do this because they won't have a viable airline industry if they don't have new machines. And surely part of extracting the deal from the US would have been, a commitment to some sort of good deal on a bunch of planes, thanks to the World Export Bank or whatever?
Oh, absolutely. I'm pretty sure America's lining up all sorts of sweeteners to get them to buy as many Boeing planes as they can get them to buy. But I still think, the Iranians will not want to be seen to be completely beholden to the Americans on this. And as we see, the Iranians have been quite successful in getting Airbus equipment. They seem to like Airbus equipment. Safran Air's just taken, 7 A340-600s, which are already flying around the world.
And they're not that old.
They're not that old. Personally, I think they'd probably like to go out and just buy Boeing.
Right.
But I don't think they will. They'll have to split it because you've got to keep the Europeans happy.
Are they a hope for the 748?
Well, there has been talk of that, given the fact that the performance figures have been revised down quite sharply on the 748.
We'll talk about some of that shortly.
I don't know that they're an ideal sort of...
but they're a 747 airline. It might make sense. Mind you, they're going to Airbus.
And they probably don't need anything that big, to be honest. They're going to need A350s, anything that can get from Tehran to America. So that's going to be A350-900, 787s, maybe a 777-300. But for the rest of their route network, they could probably use A330s.
Yeah, they're already flying A320s.
Yeah,
have been for quite a while. So they've got their heads around operating and maintaining that sort of category of aircraft, which is every Airbus, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're certainly not A380 candidates, are they?
No, I don't think so. Somebody said, they've got a big population, there's going to be a huge bottled up demand for all sorts of travel, but at the end of the day, they don't have the infrastructure in terms of airport terminals, service.
To make that work.
It's not going to work.
Interesting thing that you just touched on it before with their A340-600s, taking them. There's always been quite a bit of criticism of particularly the earlier A340 models, with the CFM engines as being slightly underpowered and, slow to climb out and all that sort of stuff. But bugger if you can get one if you're an airline wanting one. There are none.
No, they're snapped up pretty quick.
And Suriname, I think, has just got their second one. They had to wait. By any measure, it is a successful aircraft, still going very strong. And as fuel prices come down, it becomes more competitive again, doesn't it?
Yeah, and as some very interesting news coming around about the price of oil. Shell Oil's recently announced laying off 6,500 people, slashing their research and development budget by 30%, or $7 billion, which puts in, that's how big their research budget is. But their long-term view is that the price of oil will not recover. There's a few analysts in the States saying they don't think the price of oil will ever come back. Ever.
Like milk.
Yeah, and in the next 10 to 15 years, it'll drop off a cliff, and the major users of oil products will be the airline industry and shipping.
And what, they name their price pretty well, don't they?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Saudi have also said they're not going to stop pumping. They're just going to. They think there's a finite time to make the money, so they might as well just pump as much as they can. You got Iran coming back online. Iraq will sort itself out. Libya, all these countries have a vested interest in getting as much revenue in as possible,
so they'll just
regardless of cost or
there'll
price.
There'll be no holding back.
There'll be no holding back. The dams are open.
All right. Mind you, there could be a few airlines around in the West thinking, oh, here's a go. We can sell off the old A340s to these guys.
There might be a bit of that. Yeah.
And as new things begin, old things are about to go. Can't be too long before the last 737 leaves Air New Zealand.
Yes.
I think we're down to just a month or so, aren't we now?
Another month, and it'll all be over for the 737 and Air New Zealand colours.
Nearly 50 years.
Nearly
1968
years.
They came in. I think first service was flown. Well, the first service actually was not intended to be the first service, as I understand it. ZKNAC flew a replacement for a Viscount that broke down about 2 weeks before it was supposed to fly its first scheduled flight. But I think it was October 68. So do the math. That's a long time operating that aircraft.
Classic.
Yeah. I don't think any of the original bunch that came to New Zealand are flying anymore. The most recent one to retire flew for Land Chile or whatever their low cost was. And I think it retired in 2008. And that was NAQ from memory. So there you go. Though I see still going strong in Auckland, but for not much longer. When I was up there a couple of weeks ago, still an ex-NAC Friendship plying the skies full of
yes,
our courier packages.
Every now and again when I go up to Auckland, I'll walk down to the regional terminal, and you often see it sitting over the fence there.
The all-white one, eh?
Yeah, it's a big old plane.
NAN, I think that's the one I saw. It's still there. But yeah, they're not small. I've done a few cockpit flights at Friendship. They get along.
Yeah.
They're really solid, though. You know, they're like an old '60s car, and everything's very sort of utilitarian.
Yeah,
not Russian level, but you know
Yeah.
what I'm talking about. And just an interesting fact that NAC did operate the first ever Friendship built.
Oh, did they?
Aer Lingus got it, and we got it off them, and that's now back in the museum in Amsterdam
Okay.
in KLM colours. I'm pretty sure I'm right on that one.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, so last 737, couple of months away. Now, we touched on it just a moment ago, these performance figures that Boeing have just released. What's going on here? Because when is reported performance, actual performance?
Well, this is interesting. So yes, there's always been quite a big disparity between, or put it bluntly, the figures that Airbus have published and the figures that Boeing have published, the so-called brochure figures.
Right.
Now, there's always been a bit of contention, you know, that Boeing's not being honest because they're using performance figures and weights and everything that were last revised in the 90s. And it appears that they were painting a far rosier picture of the performance of the aircraft than is actually the case. Have to bear in mind that these were never the figures that were used to negotiate the contracts.
Right.
But Boeing's gone ahead and revised their published figures, which is interesting and leads one to ask, why would they do this if apparently no one was believing them? And, I mean, it might be a number of things, but perhaps one of them is that companies were getting a little bit angry when they were going to a contest on aircraft using these brochure figures, which they probably should never have done.
Right.
And then Boeing was coming in on the day and saying, oh, by the way, we can't actually fly that far or with that many people, etc., etc. And some of the changes, if anyone's interested, you can go and look on flightglobal.com. They've got a list of the changes. But just to dip in, you can see that the 777-8X, the new one, they've revised the range down by 690 nautical miles, which is quite a lot.
That is quite a lot.
Yes, the 777-300ER, they've dropped the range by 500 miles.
Okay, and that's an existing product.
Yeah, the 9X, they've dropped by 600 nautical miles. And the 747-8, they've dropped it by 60 miles, but then they've reduced the passenger carrying capacity by 60 or 70 people.
And that is 10% of the load.
Exactly.
Oh, no, more than 10% of the load.
Yeah, and they've gone all the way through. All the aircraft have been revised, all of them.
So the explanation is what? Obviously, you've got to put your best foot forward when you're marketing, doing your brochures, etc., etc.
Maybe the gap was just too big.
But it maybe smacks, get your opinion on this, where you've realised that most of your customers don't need that extra range. To design that or to get that extra range into the design in the early phase of the product is difficult. Usually it's a very mature stage when you get that performance matching those sorts of... It requires development and evolution is the point I'm making to get to that performance. So maybe they've realised, hey, most of them don't need it, and that means we don't need to wring ourselves out trying to get that little bit extra out that no one wants. So it's best just to come out, rejig the performance, because it won't make any difference anyway.
There's that, but I also suspect that the discrepancy was just too big.
Could that have been part of the sort of corporate misstepping that's been going on with Boeing? You know, they overhyped the Dreamliner. They've basically overhyped everything. And it's been maybe a bit of the culture that really they need to sort of stop doing that now.
Yeah, well, maybe they've got an engineer in charge who's saying, guys, let's call it what it is.
Yeah.
You know, we're not bad.
It's all good. But
we're as good, if not better, than the competition, so why do we pretend we're 10 times better?
Because under-promise, over-deliver always wins, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In the end.
Yeah.
I wonder also if it has anything to do with the timing, and I'm sure you got a view on this, with now the A350 being well in service with Qatar, Vietnam starting to fly the aircraft as well. The early data on how that's working out must be available to people, and I just wonder if that's any part of this. And on its own, I'm wondering how that's going.
Yes, well, the A350 does seem to be performing very well. I think it's only had one engineering-related delay with Qatar.
Right.
Since it's been flying double daily to London. I think they've just opened up Malaysia back to Qatar.
Right.
Vietnam's running theirs around. They're doing internal proving flights within Vietnam. Seems to be a textbook ramp-up.
Yeah.
And yes, as you say, the figures will be being made known to the other operators or potential operators. Everyone seems very happy. There's some interesting developments in the A350 program. One is that Singapore Airlines has returned 7 slots to Airbus. This is their language.
What do you think that's all about?
Well, so it sounds like Airbus have paid them for these slots. So Singapore Airlines is going to be taking 63 A350s as opposed to 70. The conjecture is that Airbus really wants these slots back so they can give them as incentive to an airline that is on the fence as to whether to order A350s or not.
And doesn't want to have to wait.
And doesn't want to have to wait 4 or 5 years. The talk is that it's perhaps Qantas.
Oh.
The rumour is don't be surprised if they turn up in Qantas colours.
Boy, that's going to be a dogfight then between Airbus and Boeing. Won't lie down for that, will they?
Or Emirates. It looks like the A350 787 contest might be going Airbus's way, and so Airbus needs a sweetener to say, right, well, if you want them, you can have them next year, the first 7. Who knows?
Okay.
Another interesting development which kind of ties into this, Singapore Airlines and Airbus are working on a long-range version of the A350 which hasn't been ordered, so maybe Singapore freed up these slots so they could order some of these A350-900 long-ranges, and the A350-900LR is basically a standard A350-900, but with the wing tanks of the A350-1000 installed.
Okay.
That would enable Singapore to do Singapore-USA direct with quite a large load.
Which was the mission of the A340-500.
Yes. Whether or not they'll try and fly to the East Coast, that's open at this point. They'll definitely go to the West Coast, and they'll be able to basically fill the plane up.
There's been no complaints from Qatar, and that's sort of the airline that you would expect if anything wasn't right, you'd hear about it.
They seem very happy.
All right. Anything else on the news of configuration of Boeing planes?
There's the 777 X series is heading towards design freeze.
Right.
Heavier than planned.
Always the way.
And they've had to up the size of the fan, which means it's going to stay a bit heavier because they're going to need to suck a bit more power out of those engines.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
That's the G90 platform, is it?
It's the GE, whatever it's going to be called on that.
G-Next, but uprated.
Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah.
Another interesting Boeing development is they have to put 30 tons of titanium into the 787s.
Wow.
30 tons of titanium, which translates...
expensive.
And it translates into about 17 to 19 tons of actual structure.
Yeah.
They reckon that's costing $23 million per plane, and they reckon they're losing $18 million per 787 sold at the moment.
Gosh.
A lot of this titanium got added as part of the structural redesign required.
Whereabouts does it actually go?
Wing box, wing structure, empennage,
Right.
Yeah.
Around that area. Where
Around that area. So now what they want to do is change it out for aluminium, which is you can do the engineering and replace it with aluminium. The trouble is, though, titanium has the great property of being completely inert when it comes to carbon fiber and carbon fiber fastenings. So depending on how you fasten your carbon fiber to the titanium, you don't have to really worry about how you fasten it, because you're not going to get differences in, galvanic action.
So there could be
basically corrosion caused through electrical action.
Possibilities,
yes. The trouble with aluminium is aluminium and carbon fiber is not a very good combination, so you have to have coated aluminium, or you have to have a mechanical barrier between the carbon fiber and the aluminium structure. Now, all good.
Yep.
All doable, but the airlines are apparently not too happy about this, because what does that mean? That means different inspections, it means the potential for trouble, it possibly shortens the life of the airframe, etc., etc. So a little bit of a can of worms for Boeing, particularly in the way they announced it, because basically they announced, we have to do this, we're losing money, we're doing it.
Okay, interesting. And also some Boeing news, the big FedEx order of the 767.
Yes.
Boeing must be pinching themselves. I've said this before on this program, that they are still getting so much mileage out of something that they first thought of in about 1976, 1977. But that clearly is part of the strategy of keeping that production line operating in a particular tempo, anticipating the KC program, right?
Yes, it's all about bridging that production gap. The initial report was that they were going to take 50 767s and 10 777 freighters. Then FedEx came back and said, we don't think we want 50, we want 25 and the 10 777s. And now they've come out and ordered 50 76s, no 777s. So as it stands, FedEx is going to get 50 767s, all about keeping the tanker line open, because it appears they've paid about 80 million US per 767, which is about what you'd expect to pay for a discounted 73.
So that for FedEx must pretty well one for one, if you want to think of it like that, replace the MD-10s. Most of them are probably pretty well wrung out by now. They must be, though, thinking about holding on to some of those MD-11s for longer, and I wonder if the fuel price going down has anything to do with that.
Possibly. And you'd want to keep the MD-11 sticking around anyway. They just look great.
Because they look good.
They just look fantastic.
Yeah. Here's an interesting story. This is, and we were talking about this the other day when we weren't doing the program. We were just chatting. You were filling me in on this. This new sort of weird sort of drive system that someone's thought up. I think it's a British invention, idea. Sort of harks back to, old Scotty and the impulse drive on the Enterprise. Is this as good as it sounded when you were sort of outlining it to me? Well, tell us about it.
By all accounts, it's too good to be true. But basically, you take a big microwave transmitter, hook it up to a waveguide.
Yep.
Cover both ends of the waveguide, and somehow it produces thrust, and surprising amount of thrust.
But it's almost like an anti-gravity effect, isn't it?
Pretty much. The initial reports of its working was saying it's impossible because nothing's coming out that it pushes against, so it's the conservation of momentum or something. And that breaks the laws of physics. You can't have something moving, appearing to generate thrust without actually generating thrust or pushing against something. So now it's been independently verified by 4 laboratories, Chinese laboratory, German laboratory.
Credible laboratories.
Well, the German one particularly, because they spend a lot of time debunking strange drive theories.
Yeah.
But yes, on the website it's really interesting, emdrive.com. The guy's been working on it and thinking about it for years. He's got videos showing that it works. One of his specialties is building balances and scales, so he reckons he's pretty much taken everything out of that could be influencing the effect, including the rotation of the Earth, this, that and the other.
Gosh.
They now think that it does preserve the laws of physics because the thrust is acting upon the subatomic particles that are popping up out of the quantum space.
The virtual particles.
The so-called virtual particles. And if you accept that that's true, then these microwaves are pushing against something, therefore the laws of physics are preserved and everyone's happy.
They're pushing against the vacuum energy that sits in empty space, basically, or by virtue of the activity of virtual particles. So it is sort of something from nothing, but not quite.
Yes. One of his examples is you have a current ion propulsion system. It requires 700 watts of power. It produces 23 micronewtons of thrust for 1.6 years. and the system weighs 94 kilograms to generate this. Their proposed microwave propulsion system would take the same input power, 700 watts of power.
Right.
It would produce 88 micronewtons, so almost 4 times the
Yes.
thrust. It would produce it for 15 years as
Okay.
opposed to 1.6 years, and it would weigh 9 kilograms. So working on
Yes.
that, you would be able to take a 50 kilogram science package.
Mhm.
After 1 year of thrust at 88 micronewtons, you'd be at 5.6 kilometers a second, and after 15 years, you'd be at up to 30 kilometers a second.
So it just keeps on
It
growing
just keeps
and
on
growing.
going.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not a linear acceleration because there's
Yeah.
all sorts of.
But once you're up
physical
there, you're there.
he goes on with potential applications, making lift engines
To be used on,
like
on
a big
our planet.
like a big platform. Yeah, 4 of his lift engines, each consuming 6 kilowatts of power. Each of the lift engines would produce 143 kilograms of static thrust. You could start lifting things. It would appear to be
Levitate.
anti-gravity. So
Levitate.
you could have 4 of these engines tied together with a carbon fiber spine. It would lift 400 kilograms straight up with nothing moving.
That would be freaky.
Yes, and he says there's no reason why you couldn't scale them. And look, if you could take like a nuclear reactor out of a submarine, megawatts of power, more of these lift engines, you could start lifting significant loads high into the atmosphere and then launching rockets and whatnot off there. So very interesting. A bit pie in the sky towards the end, but the small test engines that he's built do appear to work, and it could be quite exciting.
So, in theory, there's nothing stopping that, is really what people are saying.
The theory appears sound at this point.
Okay, well, we'll watch that one. It does sound like some sort of impulse drive that Mr. Scott would be proud of. All right, a couple of things to finish up on. Some aircraft deliveries that are either about to happen or just happened. I see New Zealand got another A320 at the beginning of July and about to receive as we talk. May have already received it, haven't quite checked on the final date. Another 7879, so they're getting well into that ordering process. Can't be too long for the 76. I saw a mate of mine flew over the Tasman on a 76 the other day. Very tired.
Yeah,
Very tired looking. They're obviously not investing
a bit ropey.
in the interior anymore. You sell it to FedEx.
Yeah.
Huh?
It's the last thing
Boeing
they
wouldn't want that.
They're getting 50 new ones.
Yeah, they've probably had a good thrashing, our ones. And any crashes, diversions, incidents that we know
There
of?
was that interesting Cathay Pacific 777-300ER had to take a diversion into the Aleutian Islands, an Air Force base in the Aleutians, due to a faulty cooling fan in one of the equipment bays. The passengers said that was quite exciting, and a lot of people were semi-panicking.
Is that where the guy actually filmed himself as they were?
Yeah. The guy had in direct contravention of all the rules, he filmed
It
himself the
wasn't
whole
very
way down.
dramatic, I have to say.
No, but some people are saying, oh, it was very scary, and you're like, well, really? You just landed on an island.
Also, there was that crash at Yatley, is it, in the UK?
Blackbush Aerodrome?
The
yeah.
Bin Laden family in a private jet. I didn't catch up with the Maker jet, did you?
Yeah, it was a Phenom. Embraer Phenom 300. A 6-seater.
What happened there? I wonder.
Well, they don't know. It looks like he just ran out of runway. Tried to put it down, ran out of runway, lifted off, crashed into a car park.
Oh, yeah. Okay, lucky people on the ground weren't hurt. I think it was just the people in the plane.
Yeah, they're all...
Landed in the car park.
Yeah.
All right, so that's our time again. We're sort of out of time for a aircraft of the day. We'll save that up for the next program. In the meantime, you got Paul Brennan here in Welly, and right next to me,
Martin Noakes, still in Welly.
and we'll see you again in a fortnight. See ya.
Cheers.